When it comes to long takes, few directors are as ambitious and audacious as Bi Gan. Even as he debuted his first feature, Kylie Blues, he was already pushing the limits of what could be done with a long take, filming a 41-minute sequence across miles of roads and villages around his hometown of Kylie City in Guizhou, China. But this would pale in comparison to the plans he had for his 2018 film, Long Day's Journey into Night. The final hour of Long Day's Journey into Night was to be filmed in a single unbroken take, covering a 24-acre area across 2 mountains near Kylie, by foot, by motorbike, by ropeway, and even by air. And if that wasn't enough already, it would be entirely in 3D. With so many moving parts, there were so many things that had to go right, and so many more that could easily go wrong. However, after multiple failed takes and months-long delays, against all odds, they finally pulled it off. But to my surprise, when I tried to find out exactly how they did it, I began coming up empty very quickly. Despite the film's incredible technical and artistic achievement, information on the film's production is spread thin, in part because, funnily enough, the filmmakers never thought to document the process. In an interview following the film's release, Bi Gan said, "I now regret that we didn't have some type of documentary crew or camera person that recorded how we completed that one long take for the second part of our film. We didn't have the energy to think about the fact that this should all be documented." So I decided to do exactly that myself, to research and find out exactly how one of film's greatest undocumented long takes was made. The first order of business I figured before digging into exactly how they did any of it was to find out where they'd filmed it, to give some context to the scale of things. However, this also proved more difficult than I thought it would be. While the location had never been explicitly mentioned in any of the English language sources I'd already found, I'd at least been able to glean that they had filmed somewhere around Kylie City. Seemed easy enough. How hard could it really be to find this fairly distinct location in the area around a single city? As it turned out, very hard. Kylie City encompasses an area of around 610 square miles, or 1,570 square kilometers, much of which being rural and mountainous, exactly like the location I was hunting. It also didn't help that satellite mapping seems to have limited detail in much of China, let alone completely absent a street view feature, making it all but impossible to scout out purely by sight. However, as I expanded my searches to Chinese language sites, I finally began finding some clues about the location I was searching for. First, a place called the Danzhai gold-mercury mine began cropping up in places, referencing the film's shooting on location nearby. The mine, which closed operations in the 1990s and lay abandoned since then, seemed to fit what I was looking for, but every bit of footage of the place I could find didn't look right at all. However, with a little digging, I found there was a Danzhai prison associated with the mine, and a video I stumbled across from a Chinese content creator showed clear footage of some of the filming locations, proving definitively that it was the place I was looking for. Another article narrowed things even further, placing both the mine and prison very specifically in the Kangshu Mountain Bend Valley, on the southeast side of Gaobai village. With this last bit of information, I was finally able to pull up a map, if low resolution, of where they had filmed the shot. According to sources I found interviewing the cinematographer, as well as the drone and technical teams, this long take was pulled off in 7 stages, starting in the depths of the old mine and ending in the lower side of the abandoned prison, converted into a convincing rural town. So following the map and scattered stories I was able to find from the cast and crew, let's see if we can get a sense, step by step, of how they made this incredible shot happen. The long take begins in total darkness, drifting slowly into a dimly lit mine shaft along a handcart track. This tunnel, part of the defunct gold-mercury mine, had been abandoned for decades, and immediately began giving the production problems.
就是这整个段落一开始就是困难，比如我记得一开始那个煤油灯在矿洞里面，看起来好像那不是一个问题，但是每次开拍的时候它都会熄掉，因为矿洞里面会缺少氧气。
The difficult lighting situation proved a significant challenge to the film, primarily due to the very low ambient light levels and few places to hide additional lamps due to the constantly roving camera. This was only compounded by Gan's insistence on the shot being in 3D. Not only do 3D cameras tend to be large and heavy, making it difficult or impossible to pull off some of the film's more impressive shots, they often require significantly more light to properly expose an image. Unable to light extensively and unwilling to shoot day for night, Gan and the cinematographer for the long take, David Chizallet, decided to compromise by shooting in 2D and converting to 3D in post, settling on the relatively small red Epic Helium camera for the job. This first section of the take was filmed by camera operator Xing Junran, bearing the weight of a nearly 40-pound camera rig on a gimbal as the camera wanders around the dimly lit underground set. Unable to use a traditional Steadicam due to the placement of an electromagnet on top of the camera rig, which I'll be covering in more depth later, Xing was outfitted with a 2-armed support harness to manage the weight and support the camera throughout his near 12-minute turn. The scene follows the film's protagonist, Lo Hongwu, played by actor Huang Jue, as he meets a young boy who promises to lead him out of the maze-like tunnels if he can be defeated in a game of ping pong. While simple in concept, this was one of the first of several risky moments of skill and chance Bi Gan had implemented into the shot. If Huang happened to lose the game, they would have to start all the way back at the beginning of the take, which by this point had already eclipsed a long 8 minutes. However, Gan knew that the boy, who happened to be his half-brother, was pitiful at table tennis, and knew it would be felt by the audience if the protagonist's victory was already assured. So, in secret, he bribed the boy a not insignificant sum of 200 yuan to practice for weeks, instructing him to try his very best during each and every take to defeat Huang Jue. These little details are part of what makes the take, despite its extensive choreography, still feel tense and grounded in reality. If, while watching this scene, something feels like it's actually on the line, it's because everyone on set is holding their breath right along with you.
然后拍完那条，我弟弟就把那200块钱还给我了。他说你拍电影挺不容易的，不好意思拿回去。
The next stage of the long take comprises a half-kilometer tracking shot of a motor scooter down the mountain road, which, while refreshingly simple for the crew to pull off, pushed camera operator Xing to his limits. Following the boy and Huang Jue to the mouth of the mining tunnel, Xing boarded a waiting ATV so they could keep pace with the scooter. After already carrying the 40-pound camera rig for more than 10 minutes, keeping the shot steady enough along the bumpy mountain road throughout the entire 2-minute-long scene was quite a challenge, both physically and technically. Because the stability of the shot was going to be extremely important for a quality 2D to 3D conversion, the decision was made early on to frame the shot slightly inside the camera's maximum borders, saving around 10% of the image to help with stabilization in post. This allowed them to not only make up for the limits of the gimbal in especially turbulent conditions, but also any natural unsteadiness from the camera operators as their arms grew exhausted over the course of the take. The image throughout the take is far from clean. You might notice here, for instance, the extensive flaring from every bulb and light source, and that's intentional, the result of very deliberate lens choices. Choosing a lens for any long take is always a difficult one, but the amount of factors this film's mammoth shot had to account for made it even more challenging. Weight, of course, was a particular concern, making heavy cinema zoom lenses completely impractical. So, cinematographer David Chizallet focused on finding a smaller, single focal length lens. He eventually settled on the compact 25mm Zeiss Super Speed, with its aperture set at f4 for the entirety of the shot. It was light, reliable, and even accounting for the slight cropping from shooting in the camera's 5K mode and the 10% saved for post-stabilization, it still left them with the equivalent of a 30mm lens, which was plenty wide for their purposes. However, even with the super speed, which tend to flare nicely on their own, Chizallet was unhappy with how clean and flat their camera tests were coming back, intensified by the Red camera's extremely high-resolution images. Bi Gan had made it clear to him that he was not looking for a technically perfect shot, but an immersive one. Unable to use filters to adjust the image, as they were already straining the weight limits of the drones that would be used later on in the take, Chizallet went with a unique solution, picking up a handful of dust from the ground and hurling it onto the lens, much to the horror of the entire camera department. But despite a few murderous glares, this undoubtedly worked, giving him the rougher, unclean image that he felt better represented the narrator's point of view, which ended up becoming the look of the final take. As the scooter ride comes to a stop, the shot moves into stage 3 of the take, with Xing hopping off the ATV and following them to the top of a long ropeway extending from one mountain down to the other. The ropeway's agonizing 125-meter-long descent, where both actor and camera would spend minutes dangling perilously over the canyon below, was unsurprisingly nerve-wracking to pull off. Bi Gan was reportedly terrified throughout the process, worrying he could be putting the entire production in jeopardy. "I'm afraid the camera will fall," he said. "If it breaks, I'll go bankrupt." This would not be the only time the production would be suspending the camera in the air during the take, requiring a quick and smooth way of transferring it from handheld support rigs to its ropeway harness and so on. So the production, along with a dedicated drone team, went about designing a DIY electromagnet that would fit on top of the camera and could be switched on and off with one finger, its activator shrewdly fashioned out of a simple bathroom switch. Not only did this give them the ability to attach and release the camera at a moment's notice without the bulk of other attachment systems, the powerful magnet still had enough strength to comfortably hold the 40-pound camera package over 100 feet into the air. So, as Huang Jue seated himself on the ropeway, camera operator Xing simultaneously lifted the camera up to a connection plate that had been strung up behind him, while a camera assistant flipped the switch on the electromagnet, locking the camera in place. As the descent began, control of the camera was handed off to a photographer on the drone team, operating the gimbal remotely. To keep the distance between the actor and the camera synchronized throughout the scene, which was proving difficult through traditional means, Chizallet worked with the film's mechanism technician Wu Songyi to implement a 2-power switch system, one for the actor's seat and another for the camera, so they both could be started simultaneously. Wu put in a lot of work getting this right, extensively testing the ropeway during pre-production to ensure its smoothness and flawless operation, traveling its entire distance himself each and every time. As the camera reached the bottom of the ropeway, following just after Huang Jue, the electromagnet was switched off and it dropped into the waiting hands of cinematographer David Chizallet. This segment of the take, lasting 13 minutes, follows Huang Jue's character and someone who uncannily resembles a woman he had fallen for during the first half of the film, through a maze-like billiards hall. However, navigating this confusing environment became only part of the difficulty for the camera operator after it was decided that the actor's blocking would be partially improvised every take. Chizallet remembered his distress filming these improvised scenes, noting that nobody, including him, could know where they were going to go from moment to moment, and wasn't always sure where he should point the camera.
In terms of the pool table scene, I do think that this is an element I thought that will give elegance to this particular film by having characters actually revolving around that particular location and also that particular activity. And I do think that the cinematographer was a little bit stressed out by it, or very anxious about this particular scene. And I think maybe because he doesn't play pools, and that's why he didn't really know how to focus. And I told him that all you have to do is focus on the white ball. That's all you need to do.
This particular direction by Bi Gan reached a climax in the middle of the scene, as he once again threw the entire take, now more than 22 minutes deep, to the whims of skill and fate. At a key point in the scene, Huang Jue threatens a pair of troublemaking gangsters, telling one if he can sink the 8-ball in a single shot, he'll let them go unharmed. If the actor failed to make the shot, not only would it be bad for his character inside the world of the film, the entire shot up to that point would have to be scrapped. It seems quite irresponsible, Gan said of the shot, explaining his reason behind the incredibly risky move. What if he fails to score? I think everyone will be worried about that moment, including the actors themselves. Only in this way will they be reminded that anything can happen in that moment, and will be immersed in it. Once again, though, Gan had hid a card up his sleeve with the shot. He was already very familiar with the actor playing the gangster when he hired him, having total confidence in his skill at billiards. He can score every time, Gan revealed, so I dared put it in so it can scare everyone. Finally, 30 minutes in, they had reached the riskiest, most technically demanding, and arguably most impressive part of the entire hour-long take. Locked in the billiards room high above the village and needing to get down, Huang Jue takes the ping-pong paddle given to him by the boy he played in the mine, remembering his words at the ropeway. As the paddle spins, the camera lifts off the ground, ascending high into the air and begins drifting over the village, carrying them dreamlike to its base. The drone team brought onto the production, Jieshang Aerial Photography, began work on this aspect of the shot early in its pre-production, which only became more complex as time went on. Due to the challenges of the shot, Jieshang created a purpose-built drone for the film that would be able to bear the heavy weight of the camera rig and gimbal, as well as work with the electromagnet that would hold it in place. This electromagnet, which I already touched on a little bit before, had been developed specifically for this moment in the film. This magnetic quick release, as they called it, ended up being a bit of a DIY engineering marvel, strong enough to keep the entire package securely locked in place throughout the flight, lightweight enough to avoid problems with the drones or handheld operators, and packed with magnetic shielding to prevent any interference with the myriad of other electronic devices on board. The shielding was especially important because after takeoff, the shot's framing could only be controlled remotely through the gimbal's gyro stabilizer and monitored through the attached wireless transmitters. During initial takes shot in October, none of which were usable or even completed, this scene in particular was, at the very least, fairly simple to perform for the pilot. The drone was to move 132 meters in a straight line to the other side of the village, completely in view the entire time, where it would be received by the next camera operator. However, as filming resumed the next year in February, Bi Gan had made significant alterations to the segment, increasing the flight path to over 200 meters, and more importantly, moving the drone out of view and range of the pilot for part of the segment. From where he needed to be placed, the pilot could no longer safely and reliably fly the drone for the entire 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but Jieshang, dedicated to Gan's vision for the scene, found another way. The segment would now operate in 2 pieces, each by a different drone pilot. Pilot 1 would take over control from Chizallet as normal, but this time begin radio communication with Pilot 2, who was waiting on the other side of the mountain. Their communication was essential to pulling this off, especially once they reached the critical moment, the handover. The handover needed to be completely smooth, without any sudden jumps in movement as the other operator took control. So, as the drone was reaching the point where it would leave Pilot 1's line of sight, he would call out the handover over the radio and begin slowly decelerating. Simultaneously, Pilot 2, whose controls were already linked up to the drone, would just as slowly accelerate, bringing the aircraft to a gentle, momentary stop, where Pilot 1 would officially release the controls to Pilot 2 to complete the rest of the shot, their seamless aerial duet complete. As the drone finally reached the ground, the camera was released into the hands of the shot's final camera operator, Lu Yang, who would shoot the remaining 27 minutes. This last segment of the hour-long take covers almost the entirety of the old converted prison, changing perspective several times over its course and featuring over 100 extras, with many more people just off-screen. Chizallet fondly remembered that beside the extras on screen, there was an army of people running behind the camera at all times, giving cues. During the several months-long break between shooting attempts, Gan, Chizallet, and famed Wongar-Wei gaffer Wang Qiming spent considerable time reworking the lighting to not just illuminate the area enough for proper exposure, but to create a distinctly layered lighting scheme. The lighting system was pretty sophisticated, Chizallet explained. We lit each side of the mountain from the opposite side and had very raw lighting for the village festival, with a lot of prop lighting. The lighting installations they'd set up would also continually change throughout the take, he said, as though it were a live theater performance. While there isn't nearly as much information available about shooting this segment of the take, it's undeniable how much effort it took from the cast and crew to make it happen. Looking back at the entire process of pulling off the shot, the Jieshang drone team spoke about their first meeting with Bi Gan, where he explained exactly what he'd hoped they'd be able to help him pull off. It sounded so complicated, it seemed like a joke to think about implementing it. Of course, they said he wasn't joking. Through the bitter winter South China cold, the team spent 10 hours a day outside preparing for and shooting the take, with camera operator Lu Yang dutifully completing the take every time, despite the frigid temperatures and weighty camera rig. After each test, a member of Jieshang recalled, Mr. Lu was so tired that he had to be supported by his assistant to even walk. But more than just the extreme dedication of the cast and crew, there's one moment in this segment that I believe encapsulates exactly why this long take not only works as well as it does, but stands apart from so many others. The most famous long takes are almost all lauded for being masterpieces of planning, coordination, and timing. Every moment is meticulously rehearsed. Nothing can be left up to chance. But something Bi Gan knew is that for these takes to be more than just flashy or technically impressive, they need to have the opportunity for something to go wrong. Because sometimes, those are the most beautiful moments. At the base of the town, positioned where the drone was set to land to begin this final segment, was an animal background extra, a horse carrying bushels of apples. While every take with the horse previously had gone perfectly smooth, during the very last one they shot, the one that made it into the final film, the whole take very nearly completely fell apart. Bi Gan had insisted that for this scene, they would have a wild horse brought in for the role, as a sly nod to cinematographer David Chizallet's well-received 2015 film, Mustang, casually introducing yet another unpredictable element into the take, but one that up until this point had not seemed to make much of a difference. As Liu Yang got into position for the next part of the shot, the untrained horse startled at something on the set, bucking wildly a hair's breadth away from the camera and sending apples scattering across the street. As extras darted for cover and others tried to wrangle the horse back under control, Gan fretted to Chizallet that the take that had been going so well up to this point might have been ruined. But as they reviewed the tense footage and the poetic images of an apple-strewn street, they realized they had something special. They had given fate the chance to take the film in a different direction, and this time it had. Like the ping pong scene, the pool scene, like the very concept of filming an hour-long take in 3D and suspending a camera 100 feet in the air using only a magnet, the chances they took and the fear they lived with to create this scene, this take, and this movie are what make them what they are. Uniquely thrilling, impressive, and wholly and completely unrepeatable.